lady of the house as she grinds grain into flour. We only go inside to sleep or escape the midday sun. Egyptian furniture is minimal by modern standards. Reed mats cover the floors. Simple wooden stools and low tables serve for eating. Beds are wooden frames with woven reed mattresses. For a pillow, Egyptians use a curved wooden or stone headrest, not as uncomfortable as it looks once you get used to it. The house has no bathroom as we'd recognize it. A corner of the courtyard has a designated spot for a ceramic pot used as a toilet, emptied daily into the fields as fertilizer. Bathing happens with water carried from the Nile or a local canal poured over the body while standing in a shallow stone basin. We bathe daily, the woman tells you, noticing your interest. Cleanliness is important to us. This is true. Ancient Egyptians were obsessed with hygiene by ancient standards. They used natron, a natural salt, as soap, brushed their teeth with frayed reed brushes, and even used mint as breath freshener. While the royals and elites might use elaborate makeup, wigs and jewelry, ordinary Egyptians dress simply. Men typically wear a simple linen kilt, while women wear straight linen dresses with straps that cover their breasts. Children often go naked until puberty. Sandals are for the wealthy. Most people go barefoot. In the fields surrounding the village, farmers work with simple tools, wooden ploughs pulled by oxen, hoes, sickles for harvesting. Egyptian agriculture followed a predictable annual cycle governed by the Nile's flood. There are 3 seasons, a farmer explains while checking the irrigation channels in his field. Akhet, the flood, when the Nile rises and covers our fields. Pereh, the growing season, when we plant after the waters recede. And Shemu, the harvest, before the cycle begins again. This natural rhythm gave Egyptian civilization remarkable stability. While other ancient societies struggled with unpredictable rainfall, the Nile's annual flood was reliable enough that Egyptians could build their entire society around it. Throughout the Old Kingdom, roughly 2700–2200 BCE, this system thrived. The king maintained cosmic order, the Nile flooded properly, crops were abundant, and monumental projects continued. Egypt was the superpower of its day, wealthy and secure behind its natural desert barriers. The pyramids of the 4th dynasty mark the pinnacle of this achievement. After Khufu's Great Pyramid, his son Khafre built the 2nd pyramid at Giza, the one with the Sphinx in front, and his grandson Menkaure built the 3rd, smaller pyramid. Together they form the iconic skyline we associate with ancient Egypt. But by the 5th dynasty, something was changing. The pyramids built by later kings were smaller, with less impressive materials. The massive building projects had strained Egypt's resources. Climate change was beginning to affect the reliability of the Nile flood. Political power was becoming more decentralized. Let's visit one final site before the Old Kingdom begins its decline. At Abusir, just south of Giza, King Unas has built his pyramid complex around 2400 BCE. What makes it special isn't its size, but what's inside. The walls of the burial chamber are carved with hundreds of hieroglyphic inscriptions known as the pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings in Egypt. These spells will protect the king in the afterlife, a priest explains as artisans carefully carve the hieroglyphs. They will help him navigate the dangers, join with Osiris, and rise to the sky with Ra. The pyramid texts give us our first detailed look at ancient Egyptian religious beliefs. They describe a complex afterlife journey where the king must overcome obstacles, pass judgments, and transform into different divine forms. This religious tradition would evolve over thousands of years, but its core elements are already present. While Unis's causeway connecting his pyramid to the valley temple shows scenes of bounty and prosperity, it also contains a troubling image, emaciated figures representing famine victims. This rare moment of realism in Egyptian art hints at problems on the horizon. "These are the Bedouin from the desert edges," an artist explains, painting the thin figures. "They suffer when the rains fail, but such troubles could never reach the Black Land." He's wrong. By 2200 BCE, about 200 years after Unas, Egypt would face a series of low Nile floods, leading to famines, political instability, and the collapse of central authority. The Old Kingdom's end would plunge Egypt into its first dark age, a period of fragmentation called the First Intermediate Period. As the sun sets on the Pyramid Age, you watch workers heading home after a day of construction. They're tired but satisfied, participating in what they believe is the most important work possible, ensuring their king's immortality and, by extension, the stability of their world. They have no idea that the magnificent civilization they're building, with its massive monuments, complex bureaucracy, and elaborate religious traditions, will collapse within a few generations, that the divine order they take for granted is more fragile than they can imagine. Unlike your safe, predictable world with its weather forecasts and grocery stores, these ancient Egyptians live with constant uncertainty. One bad Nile flood means widespread hunger. One weak pharaoh means political instability. The monuments they build are, in part, an attempt to create permanence in an impermanent world. As night falls over the Giza Plateau, the partially completed Great Pyramid looms against the starry sky. Thousands of workers sleep in their barracks, exhausted from a day of hauling stone. In the nearby palace, Pharaoh Khufu reviews plans with his officials. And along the Nile, ordinary Egyptians sleep in their simple homes, trusting that tomorrow will be like today, unaware of the changes that will eventually transform their eternal empire. The Nile isn't flooding properly anymore. For the 5th year in a row, the waters have barely risen, leaving fields parched and granaries dangerously empty. We're now around 2180 BCE, and Egypt's Old Kingdom, the age of massive pyramids and centralized royal power, How can the king fail to bring the floods? A farmer asks, looking at his withered crops. Has he lost the favour of the gods? This is Egypt's first major crisis, what historians call the First Intermediate Period, a perfect storm of disasters, climate change bringing multiple low Nile floods, famine spreading through the countryside, and a weakened monarchy unable to respond effectively. Pharaoh Pepti II, the last significant king of the Old Kingdom, supposedly reigned for 94 years but ended his incredibly long rule as an ineffective old man. Think about this for a second. Imagine if Queen Elizabeth had stayed on the throne until she was 120 years old, increasingly frail and out of touch. The system just can't function properly with that kind of leadership vacuum. The collapse of central authority creates a power vacuum that regional governors, called nomarchs, quickly fill. These local rulers stop sending taxes to the capital, instead keeping resources to take care of their own territories. Egypt effectively splits back into the regional kingdoms it had been before Narmer's unification over 900 years earlier. Let's visit one of these regional power centres. At Moala in Upper Egypt, a nomarch named Anktifi has declared himself the effective ruler of his territory. He's had his tomb carved with an autobiography that tells us exactly what life was like during this chaotic time. I gave bread to the hungry and clothing to the naked, Ankhtaphi's inscription boasts. I never allowed anyone to go hungry in this province. Reading between the lines of Ankhtaphi's tomb text, we see a man taking advantage of the power vacuum. He describes military campaigns against neighbouring provinces, claiming he's bringing order, but really just expanding his territory. He barely mentions the king at all, just one tiny reference to a royal name, almost as an afterthought. I am the beginning and the end of mankind, Ankhtaphi's inscription declares, since nobody like me existed before, nor will he exist. Talk about ego, but his self-promotion reveals something crucial. Local strongmen were now the real power in Egypt. The divine pharaoh was increasingly irrelevant. The real suffering, though, falls on ordinary Egyptians. Ankhtaphi's tomb contains a chilling description. All of Upper Egypt was dying of hunger to such a degree that everyone had come to eating their children. While that's probably exaggerated for dramatic effect, like, look how bad things were until I saved everyone, archaeological evidence does show signs of widespread malnutrition during this period, without the coordinated response of a strong central government. Local areas were left to fend for themselves when the Nile failed to flood properly. Now, around 2050 BCE, we're in Thebes, modern Luxor. This southern city was previously a backwater, but it's becoming the centre of a movement to reunify Egypt. A family of local rulers named Mentuhotep, the war god Montu, is satisfied, are building military power and expanding northward. The South will rise again, jokes a soldier as troops gather for a northern campaign. Thebes will rule all Egypt. He's right. After decades of fighting, Mentuhotep II defeats the northern rulers based at Heracleopolis and reunifies Egypt around 2055 BCE, establishing what we now call the Middle Kingdom. Here's where things get really brutal. When archaeologists excavated Mentuhotep's temple complex at Dir el-Bahri, they found a mass grave containing about 60 soldiers. These weren't carefully mummified nobility. These were the actual guys who fought and died in the civil war to reunify Egypt. Look at this, an archaeologist says, pointing to a skeleton. Arrow penetration to the chest, and this one, massive head trauma, probably from a mace. These soldiers' bodies tell the violent story of reunification. Some had healed fractures from previous battles before being killed in their final fight. Others showed signs of having been finished off while helpless on the battlefield. All were collected and buried with honour in what might be the world's first known war cemetery. But the real horror of Egypt's civil war happened at Abydos, Egypt's most sacred site. This was the burial ground of Egypt's first kings, the ones who followed Narmer and established the early dynasties. During the Civil War, northern troops did the unthinkable. They desecrated these royal tombs, burning them and destroying the royal mummies inside. The vile deed, as later texts called it, shattered Egypt's physical connection to its royal ancestors. The sacred bodies of the kings, meant to be preserved for eternity, were destroyed. It was an act of cultural desecration almost impossible for modern people to fully grasp. Imagine if someone burned down Arlington National Cemetery while simultaneously destroying the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. Mentuhotep Seng's reunification of Egypt was thus not just a political victory, but a spiritual restoration. He portrayed himself as the heir to the Old Kingdom, building a temple complex that combined pyramid and temple elements. He wore both the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, symbolizing the reunification of the two lands. "I have healed the division," Mentuhotep declares in an inscription. "The two lands are united under my rule as they were under the kings of old." The Middle Kingdom that follows, roughly 2050–1650 BCE, is considered by many scholars to be Egypt's golden age. Not of massive monuments like the Old Kingdom, but of art, literature, and a more humanistic culture. The trauma of the First Intermediate period had changed Egyptian society profoundly. Let's visit the new capital at Itj Tawi, near the entrance to the Fayum region. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs have moved the administrative centre from Memphis to this new location, symbolising a fresh start. In the scribal schools attached to the royal court, something remarkable is happening. A new form of literature is emerging. Stories, teachings, and even what we might call novels. The best known is the tale of Sinuhe, about an Egyptian official who flees to Asia after the assassination of a king, lives among foreigners, and eventually returns home to Egypt. "Read it to me again," a young scribe asks his teacher, the part where Sinuhe fights the champion of Retinue. The teacher unrolls a papyrus scroll and reads dramatically. "Then he came at me while I waited. I shot him, my arrow sticking in his neck. He screamed, he fell on his nose. I slew him with his own battle axe." This is entertainment, not just religious or royal propaganda. The Egyptians are developing a rich literary tradition that includes adventure stories, wisdom texts, and even love poetry. Unlike the formal, idealized art and writing of the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom literature often deals with uncertainty, moral ambiguity, and real human emotions. Another important text from this period is the dialogue of a man with his bar, essentially, a man arguing with his soul about whether life is worth living, possibly the world's first recorded exploration of existential despair. The Egyptian who wrote it, whoever he was, would have understood Hamlet's "to be or not to be" perfectly well. "Why do I remain alive?" the man asks his soul. "Death is before me today, like the recovery of a sick man, like going outside after being confined." His soul responds, "If you think about burial, it's heartbreak. It's bringing tears by making a man miserable. Don't think about it." So basically, a guy is contemplating suicide, and his soul is like, "Dude, chill, death sucks too." This psychological depth reflects a culture coming to terms with the trauma of civil war and social collapse. The old certainties were gone. The king wasn't an untouchable god anymore, and the promise of eternal order had been broken. The Middle Kingdom response was to create a more accessible version of Egyptian culture. Royal portraiture becomes more humanistic. Kings are shown with worry lines and expressions that suggest the burden of rule. Regular people can now access afterlife magic previously reserved for royalty. Coffins for non-royals are inscribed with protective spells adapted from the royal pyramid texts. "Even a craftsman like me can have an afterlife now," says a carpenter as he saves to buy his own inscribed coffin. "The gods will know my name." This democratization of the afterlife is one of the most important developments in Egyptian religious history. By the Middle Kingdom, even middle-class Egyptians could purchase funeral equipment with protective spells and images, essentially giving them access to the same afterlife previously reserved for kings. The economic foundation for this cultural flowering comes from massive infrastructure projects started by the Middle Kingdom pharaohs. Let's visit one of them, a huge irrigation project in the Fayum region, where channels and dikes are being constructed to control the Nile's flow into this natural depression. When complete, this system will irrigate thousands of acres, explains an overseer as workers dig channels. Even in years of low flood, we'll have water stored here.
Senusret III, one of the most powerful kings of the 12th dynasty, exemplifies the new Middle Kingdom ruler. His statues show him with a careworn, almost scowling expression, a far cry from the serene, idealized faces of Old Kingdom kings. The message is clear: ruling is hard work, not divine play. The king sleeps little, thinking of his people, a court official explains. His ears hear the needs of Upper and Lower Egypt. Senusret III was also a military badass who led campaigns into Nubia, modern Sudan, to secure Egypt's southern frontier and control the gold mines there. Instead of relying on the traditional Egyptian approach of periodic raids, he established a permanent military presence by building a series of massive fortresses along the Nile. These Middle Kingdom fortresses were engineering marvels, massive mud brick structures with walls up to 11 metres, 36 feet high, and moats that would make medieval castle builders jealous. The largest, Buhan, had an outer wall over a mile in circumference. They functioned as military bases, administrative centres, and trading posts rolled into one. These walls say to the Nubians, "Egypt is here to stay," a garrison commander tells you as you walk the battlements. "No one passes north or south without our permission." Control of these fortresses meant control of trade. Gold, ivory, ebony, and exotic animal skins flowed north from Inner Africa, while manufactured Egyptian goods went south. The fortresses also processed copper and other minerals mined in the surrounding deserts. But Egypt's influence wasn't limited to the south. During the Middle Kingdom, Egypt established trading connections across the Mediterranean world and into the Near East. At the port of Byblos in modern Lebanon, Egyptian merchants had a permanent presence trading for the cedar wood that Egyptians prized for shipbuilding and luxury items. Lebanon's mountains grow the finest cedars, an Egyptian trader tells you as a ship unloads at an Egyptian harbour. One tree can make a mast tall enough to carry a sail that moves a ship with 60 men and tons of cargo. Egyptian ships were technological marvels capable of navigating both the Nile and the Mediterranean. One of the most famous Middle Kingdom achievements was a trading expedition to the mysterious land of Punt, probably somewhere along the Red Sea coast of Africa, recorded in detailed relief carvings showing exotic goods being brought back to Egypt. From Punt we brought frankincense trees, ebony, gold, ivory and exotic animals, boasts an expedition leader, even baboons and a giraffe for the king's menagerie. The Middle Kingdom also saw significant developments in everyday technology. Water clocks, improved pottery wheels, bronze working, and advancements in mathematics and medicine all occurred during this period. Egyptian doctors were famous throughout the ancient world, with specialized knowledge of anatomy, pharmaceuticals, and surgery. I found this old medical papyrus transcript where an Egyptian doctor describes treating a head wound. He examines it and says, "If you examine a man with a gash on his head that penetrates to the bone, you should palpate his wound. If you find that there is a swelling protruding on the outside of that gash, you should say about him, 'An ailment I will treat.'" But if the skull is actually split open, revealing the brain, the diagnosis changes, an ailment not to be treated, which is honestly fair enough for Bronze Age medicine. Despite these achievements, the Middle Kingdom contained the seeds of its own decline. Senusret III and his successor Amenemhat III had centralized power by reducing the authority of the nomarchs, those regional governors, but this meant the system depended increasingly on a strong king. When Amenemhat IV died after a brief reign, he was succeeded by a female pharaoh, his sister Sobekneferu. While she was a legitimate ruler, her brief reign, about 4 years, ended without a clear successor, concluding the 12th dynasty. The 13th dynasty that followed maintained the appearance of the Middle Kingdom, but with significantly less stability. In less than a century, more than 60 kings ruled in rapid succession, few lasting more than a year or two. Central control weakened, and Egypt began to fragment again. During this unstable period, new groups were moving into the Nile Delta from the Near East. Known to the Egyptians as Amu, or Asiatics, they gradually established themselves as rulers in the eastern delta city of Avaris. By around 1650 BCE, these foreign rulers, whom historians call the Hyksos, had gained control of northern Egypt, while a native Egyptian dynasty continued to rule the south from Thebes. Egypt was divided once more, entering the Second Intermediate Period, but this division was different from the first. Now, foreigners controlled a significant portion of Egypt, challenging not just political unity, but cultural identity. They worship strange gods, complains a Theban priest. They use curved swords instead of proper Egyptian weapons. They speak our language with strange accents. How can such people claim to be kings of Egypt? Yet the reality was more complex. Archaeological evidence shows the Hyksos quickly adopted Egyptian culture, writing and royal titles. They worshipped Egyptian gods alongside their own deities. Rather than being simply foreign invaders, they represented the complex cultural mixing that comes with migration and integration. As the sun sets on the Middle Kingdom, Egypt stands at a crossroads. The confident, isolated civilization of the Old Kingdom is gone forever. The more cosmopolitan, internationally connected Middle Kingdom is fading. Ahead lies a period of foreign influence, followed by a new kind of Egyptian empire, one that will project its power far beyond the Nile Valley. In your modern bed, with its machine-made sheets and memory foam pillow, you can sleep secure knowing food will be available tomorrow regardless of weather or politics. But as you drift off in ancient Egypt at the end of the Middle Kingdom, such certainties are fading. The Nile may or may not flood properly. The gods may or may not be pleased. And foreigners with strange weapons and customs are moving into the land of the pharaohs, bringing both threat and opportunity to the world's most ancient civilization. Morning breaks over a divided Egypt. In the north, foreign rulers called the Hyksos control the delta from their capital at Avaris. In the south, Egyptian kings still rule from Thebes. We're in the Second Intermediate Period, around 1600 BCE, and tensions between these two kingdoms are reaching a breaking point. The Hyksos aren't what you might expect. Rather than wild barbarians, they're sophisticated rulers who've largely adopted Egyptian culture. They write in hieroglyphs, worship Egyptian gods alongside their own deities, and use Egyptian titles. Their kings have taken Egyptian throne names. The current ruler calls himself King Apophis. They want to be Egyptian, a Theban official scoffs. They wear our clothes, use our writing, but they'll never truly understand Ma'at. Ma'at, that concept of cosmic order, balance and justice that underpins Egyptian civilization. To the Thebans, only a true Egyptian king can maintain it. What makes the Hyksos truly threatening isn't just their control of northern Egypt, but their military innovations. They've introduced new weapons and tactics that give them an edge. The composite bow, more effective axes, and most importantly, the horse and chariot. Let's visit a Hyksos military camp outside Avaris. Soldiers are training with these strange new weapons, particularly the chariot, a light, fast, two-wheeled vehicle pulled by horses. Egypt had never seen anything like it before. The chariot is a mobile fighting platform, a Hyksos officer explains to new recruits. One man drives while the other shoots. We can strike and move before Egyptian infantry can even reach us. This military technology was revolutionary. Previously, Egyptian battles were mainly infantry affairs, masses of men with shields, spears, and maces slugging it out. The chariot changed everything, allowing archers to rapidly deploy, shoot, and relocate. It was the ancient equivalent of introducing tanks to a battlefield of foot soldiers. The standoff between Thebes and the Hyksos deteriorated when King Apophis sent a message to the Theban ruler Seqenenre-Ptah. The exact contents are lost to history, but it apparently contained an insult so severe that it provoked a military response. The message complained about hippos in a Theban pool making noise and keeping Apophis awake in his capital hundreds of miles away, a court official whispers. It was a deliberate provocation. Whatever the message contained, the conflict escalated. Seqenenre-Ptah led forces north against the Hyksos but died in the fighting. His mummy, discovered by archaeologists in the 1880s, shows the horrifying injuries that killed him, massive wounds to the head from what were likely Hyksos-style axes. 5 separate blows, a royal physician says quietly, examining the king's body as it's prepared for mummification. He faced his enemies directly, too directly. The struggle continued under Seqenenre's son Kamose, who pushed further north, and then under his brother Amose, who finally succeeded around 1550 BCE. Amose besieged Avaris, captured it, and pursued the fleeing Hyksos all the way to their fortress at Sharuhen in southern Canaan, which he besieged for 3 years before capturing it. The victory over the Hyksos marks the beginning of Egypt's new kingdom, 1550–1069 BCE, arguably the peak of ancient Egyptian civilization, but something fundamental had changed. The experience of foreign occupation and the struggle to expel the invaders transformed Egypt from an insular kingdom into an aggressive empire. Never again will foreigners rule the Black Land, Ahmose declares to his troops. From now on, we will strike them in their own territories before they can threaten Egypt. This new imperial mindset, combined with the military technologies adopted from the Hyksos, particularly the chariot, turned Egypt into the ancient world's superpower. Under the kings of the 18th dynasty, Egyptian armies would march far beyond their traditional borders, creating an empire that stretched from Sudan to Syria. Let's jump ahead a few decades to the reign of Thutmose III, around 1450 BCE. He's led the Egyptian army north into Canaan, where he faces a coalition of local princes backed by the powerful kingdom of Mitanni at the Battle of Megiddo, probably the first major battle in history that we can reconstruct in detail. The enemy has taken position at Megiddo, reports a scout to Thutmose. They believe we must take the wide, safe road around the mountain, but there is a narrow path that leads directly to them. They won't expect us there. Thutmose makes a daring decision, leading his army through a narrow, dangerous mountain pass that his generals advise against. The gamble pays off. He catches the coalition forces by surprise and scatters them, forcing them to retreat into the walled city of Megiddo, which he then besieges for 7 months. If we had followed the easy path as the enemy expected, the battle would have been much harder, Thutmose tells his officers afterward. Sometimes the most dangerous route offers the greatest opportunity. Thutmose III would ultimately lead at least 17 military campaigns into the Near East, creating Egypt's first true empire. He was so successful that he's sometimes called the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. Under his rule, wealth poured into Egypt: gold, silver, precious woods, horses, and exotic goods from across the known world. But before Thutmose III's solo rule, there was one of the most remarkable chapters in Egyptian history, the reign of Hatshepsut, his stepmother and aunt, who ruled as a female pharaoh for about 22 years. Officially, Hatshepsut began as regent for young Thutmose III, who was only about 2 years old when his father died, but within a few years she had taken the unprecedented step of declaring herself king, not queen, but king with all the titles and regalia of a male pharaoh. Let's visit her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, where massive relief sculptures show Hatshepsut performing all the traditional duties of kingship. In these images, she's often depicted with a male body wearing the traditional false beard of the pharaohs, though other images show her in female form. The king must be shown performing the sacred rituals, explains a priest at the temple. Hatshepsut does everything a king must do to maintain Ma'at. One of Hatshepsut's greatest achievements was a trading expedition to the land of Punt, recorded in detail on her temple walls. The carvings show Egyptian ships sailing to this exotic location, probably somewhere in East Africa, where they traded for frankincense trees, ebony, gold, ivory, and exotic animals. The Punt expedition shows our strength extends beyond military conquest, says a court official proudly. Nations willingly trade with Egypt because